How's it going, everyone? Tommy Marquez and Lauren Khalil here with another edition of Talking Elite Fitness. Sean is still in paradise. That means we have one more opportunity to burn down the place before he gets back. It is, I guess if you're listening, this is probably Friday, but I'm also joined, as I mentioned, by a flustered and perturbed Lauren Khalil. Lauren, what has you so nonplussed this Thursday afternoon?
So I'm seconds away from selling my dogs for free on Facebook Marketplace, followed by, which my mom has actually done to my turtle. So I think that's why.
What?
Yeah. While I went away for college, all of a sudden I see on Facebook that she's selling my turtle for free.
I don't think there's enough time in this show to unpack that trauma, but
I go to therapy now.
oh my gosh. Well, it is Thursday, and as I just mentioned, Lauren is rushing her way back to join us today after dealing with some dog shenanigans. But we do have quite a bit to talk about today. In just a moment, we will be joined by Brent Fikowski of the PFAA to shine some light on the whole athlete exemption scenario, a little bit of where his stance is as someone that's been, trying to help on the athlete advocacy side. And as well as he came prepared with some history on the rulings and where he thinks the sport can improve, as well as some interesting insight into the whole scenario. We also have
He
some.
has to be our most prepared guest on our
Oh, by
show. I
far.
think that he had a binder and notes and a whole timeline for us.
Oh my gosh, it was impressive. And I know he had more, but I mean, sometimes, 40 minutes just isn't enough. But it was great. And I think he made some very salient points around where there could be some improvements, because obviously it is a hot topic and there are some discussions going on. And people are rightfully upset around how things have kind of processed in this and ways to ultimately make the sport better. And what I think he says does boil down to making it more accessible to athletes and giving opportunities to compete. But we'll get to that in just a second. But first, we do, as we mentioned, might happen while we were somewhat recording or getting in that show prep process last time on Tuesday. We do have games dates announced for the Masters competition. The Legends Championship announced that not only will the Masters division be expanding, but it'll be taking place August 29th through September 1st, which just so happens to be Labor Day, the same weekend as the teenagers, but it'll be happening in Birmingham, Alabama. So yeah, that just came down the pipe. Lauren, I know you and I were kind of speculating a little bit about where it could be, when it could be. And then one thing that we actually did mention right as we are about to sign off was that there could be the same weekend, because Labor Day is kind of that hot weekend for getting people to move around a bit.
Yeah, so certainly a lot to unpack there. And, I don't envy the position that the event directors had to be in to not only find a venue with less than a year's notice, but also find dates that the venue is available and make sure that they can be there. And how does it fall in line with the whole CrossFit Games season? So it'll be interesting. I know later this week, we're going to talk to some folks from Legends who will give more clarity and perspective to what that format is like, and even some of the changes that we'll see this year.
Yep, we will be talking with Bob Jennings and the crew from the Legends Championship, who were responsible for putting that on, the CrossFit Games Masters competitions, to get some more of the details, some more of the ideas behind the decision to ultimately go to Birmingham. I know that that's an awesome facility that they're going to, and it is an option as far as like locale, where they're trying to be very open to families coming and spending the weekend there, because there is a lot to do. I know we've chatted offline. Master Champ and friend of the program, Jason Grubb, lives nearby. That he just set his roots down there after being kind of a man on the road. But yeah, we will be talking to Bob Jennings later on, and we'll have that for you next week once Sean is back and we're back into the regular swing of things. But on top of that, Lauren, you brought this to my attention when it posted the 24.1 open announcement. I guess some details. I mean, date,
Question
time.
mark?
Yeah. The announcement on the CrossFit Games Instagram page reveals that it was 11 a.m. Pacific time is when the announcement show, I guess, will kick off. There'll be 4 of the fittest to kick off the 2024 season, which is interesting.
Mhm.
And there's a new twist on live announcements. It said, in addition to setting the top scores in 24.1, competitors will compete bonus workouts to win the Rogue Fitness Golden Barbell.
What is the golden barbell?
That's immediately what came to mind. It'd be cool if it was solid gold, although I don't think it would. Depending on the carat, it might not hold weight very well, but that'd be sweet. I guess we're efforting getting some more information on that. I'm sure that they purposely let it vague to try and stir the pot a little bit and let some people
Mhm.
speculate. But
I mean,
yeah,
especially with that, with it being an hour earlier than everybody's used to, and then live announcement, but then under it, throwdown. Is that the
hmm
bonus workouts? They've never called it a throwdown.
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it creates a little bit more palace intrigue on top of what there already is in terms of what this could mean. I think it's an interesting wording because 24.1, the first open announcement. I mean, it's the kickoff to the season, right? There's never more anticipation around a particular workout or test than there is really that first one. Because after we get up and going, I think viewership does go up, but that first one just kind of has a little bit different magic and kind of
Yeah.
zeal to it. But yeah, so we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully, some more information comes out in the coming days. But those were 2 big pieces of time, date information that did come down the pipe. As a kind of update, a weekly update, we do have the next iteration, week 3 of the open report from friend of the program, Mike Halpin. If you're not familiar, again, he runs the page Known and Knowable. Does some fantastic stats work, and he has been publishing weekly articles on the Morning Chalk Up, recapping some piece of historical data, and kind of a revisit of some aspects of the Open each week, on top of providing checkpoints and updates stats wise on Open registration, registration breakdowns by division, by location, top affiliate counts, what the cut lines will be if it were today that registration closed. So definitely go check that out. We crossed the 100,000 registrant barrier, which is
Yeah.
ahead of schedule of 2022. Obviously, we've kind of compared and contrast a couple of the different timelines, but the one thing to note is that he did list the days, the days since the opening of registration that it took to get to 100K. And right now, 2024 sits in somewhere between 2018 and 2019. 2017, it took 19 days. 2018, it took 18 days. And then 2019, it took 27 days. And there was a late surge at the end as people got FOMO last minute. But hopefully, if registration sits somewhere between 2018 and 2019, I think everyone would be pumped. Where as it stands right now, if you're listening to this, it's Friday. Um, Mike does list an average rate of around 3,700 each day. So that would put, if you're watching on Friday, the data was pulled on Wednesday. We're probably north of 130. So that means we still have about 200K to go. And knowing that there's a big surge at the end that hopefully comes to kind of boost that. But have you signed up?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We're waiting on you and Sean, though.
I know. I figured Sean gets back from vacation. He'll feel refreshed and ready to sign up, and I'll let him be the lead.
And what
So,
about you?
I mean, I'm going to sign up. I've signed up every year. So, I gotta
The
get that.
day before.
I got to get that badge. Yeah. Oh, yeah. If we're lucky. So yeah. So definitely go check that out. It's on the Morning Chalk Up. It is titled The Open Report Week 3. And it's got some good numbers just kind of keep you guys in the know with everything that's going on the open registration side, because that is always a big topic of discussion.
Mhm.
So let's get into the meat of our discussion for today, with Brent Fikowski breaking down some of the historical rule exemptions for region, what's going on currently in the space with athletes. We discuss a little bit of Elliot Turner's situation and more, as well as some options and ways they think we could best move forward to avoid these issues in the future. So with that, let's kick things over to our sit down earlier today with Brent Fikowski. All right, now we welcome in our guest, the president of the PFAA Athlete Board and CrossFit Games athlete extraordinaire, Brent Fikowski. Brent, first and foremost, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. I had a tough leg session, so I'm standing in my gym, and I did some split squats. And yeah, I'm like I should probably be like cooling down on a bike, but I'm like kind of rolling up my feet, and then when we're done, I'll cool down. But I'm good. I'm really good.
We're getting a little active flush there, letting gravity do the work.
Some high knees.
So we're the topic of discussion today, and this is something we wanted to kind of get your perspective on, as well as someone who from the PFAA works on athlete advocacy around the region exemptions rule and the classifications for athletes and where they compete. And I know you've brought in a ton of history. I know you're someone that has competed in multiple regions yourself, having gone from Canada, Australia, and seen the various iterations of that. So where I think we'll start is, as it stands currently, what is your broad belief on the rule and how it's been applied, and maybe dig into some of the history behind that?
Yeah, I've come in prepared. So for those of you listening, you're going to get a little history lesson today on where we are and how we got there when it comes to these sorts of rules, because I think a lot of people just aren't aware of that history and maybe don't have a lot of context. I think as a general thing, I personally don't like the rule as it relates to how individual athletes are sorted between semifinals. It's definitely not overall advantageous for athletes. I don't think it makes a lot of sense in the context of what our sport is either. I think it checks a box in regards to maybe CrossFit's desire to have like a worldwide representation. So they're hoping like, hey, we want to have someone representing the Australia or the African semifinal when they go to the games, and those people at those semifinals are very much, belong to that area. So I think it checks that box for them. But I think as a whole, it's negative for the athletes, which is what I primarily, I'm focused on trying to advocate for. And as far as the application of the rule, I think in Ellie Turner's case, they applied the rules exactly as they're written to her. And it's super unfortunate for her that, whether it ends her season or causes her like a huge amount of, a huge financial cost to go and do that one competition. That's super frustrating for her. I can't speak to whether or not in this particular instance they've applied the rules fairly to everyone else. CrossFit's kept those, all the details of those things secret, right? We don't know all the details of, let's say it's Katrin David's daughter or Roman Krenikov, and I don't hold anything against them. I mean, they submitted their case and they want to compete in North America, and CrossFit said yes, and so I don't expect them to, bring forward their information. But when we don't have the full picture, it kind of leaves us to come to our own conclusions. And in the case of Roman, the rules seem to pretty distinctively say that he's going to have to compete in Asia. Like when you just read the rules, you're like, oh, I remember reading the rules when they first came out mid-December 2023, and I'm like, oh man, Roman's going to have to go back to Asia. Like it's just clearly how they're written. And so then he was given an exemption to compete in North America. And I think they maybe made a statement like, oh yeah, by the way, if you were exempt last year, we'll kind of take that into consideration. But that wasn't written in the rules. They sort of added that later. But yeah, I don't personally like the rule, and whether or not it's enforced consistently, I'm not really sure.
So then when you look at what could make the rule better, what does that plan look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I can dive a little bit into the history of how we got here, but yeah, I think it makes sense to do it very similar to how they do for the teams. And so for the longest time, or for a window of time, I'll get into it, the teams of 4, the teams of 6 prior to qualify for semis, to go to the games, were just done based on like where you were living, right? And so right now it's very simple. It's like, where do you do the open and where do you do quarterfinals? That's your team. Like, we don't care who you are. We don't care what passport you have. You could not have a passport at all. As long as you do the quarterfinals and the open in the same affiliate, you're part of that affiliate and you're representing that affiliate. Good luck. To me, that makes a lot more sense. Now, yeah, to me, that makes a lot more sense. It's easier to enforce. It's clearer. It would be less work for CrossFit Inc. And I think it's also fairer. And I think it makes more sense given the context of where this sport is in its growth, but also I think where it needs to go. I don't think there's a future where it needs to be like national representation, because that's not certainly how it works in the PGA. It's like, who has the highest world rank, you're on the tour. It doesn't matter if they're all Americans or if none of them are Americans. It's like, who's the best.
Mm-hmm. And to be fair, like the system for individuals used to be that way too. In the early days, 2011, I believe, up until they started making some significant changes in the more recent years. But you used to be able to move wherever you train. That's where you were, and we saw athletes do that, move frequently, whether it was for work or for training close to proximity with their cohort. It was pretty familiar, and I think the argument was maybe that they didn't want people jumping to easier regions. But it seems like a pretty small group that you're basing that rule off. And I don't know. Do you think there's a maybe even an in between where if like they explicitly stated, hey, you have to spend like on your second season in that location, you can train there, or do you think it's as simple as just wherever you are, that's where you compete?
Yeah. So I think an example of I think what they're trying to, with this rule, the one issue that it certainly solves is, let's say there's weaker regions. And in the case of the last few years, you could point to Asia, Africa, South America, right? So those regions, when it comes to individual athletes, usually don't perform as well on the world stage as the Europe, North American, and Australian athletes. Don't get me wrong, there's exceptions, but those are the stats. And so what they probably want to avoid is someone from, let's say, America, and they go, you know what, I'm going to move to Africa. I'm going to get a job, let's say in South Africa or Egypt. And I'm going to kind of do that to jump regions. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to take that spot at semis. So there's one less, African person that's going to qualify for semis. And then maybe that person makes the games. And so, people from Africa might not be super stoked that someone kind of swooped in and took their one game spot. Now, there's some Africans that don't like the current rule because I'll just, say it how it is. Michelle Basnet, she's lived in the States for a long period of time, but she still has a South African passport. So she travels back, she competes at the African semifinal or the semifinal, and then she qualifies and she goes to the games. And there's some people from South Africa that feel like she's not one of theirs. She's like maybe is an accurate representation of that group. And, so for that reason, they don't love the rule, but like, it's going to be one or the other. Like one way you're going to have someone like Michelle Basnet, and it happened during 2019 season, right? Alessandro Pacelli represented Italy. Frankie Wood represented Honduras. He lived in Canada for years. He did the Open in Canada for years. And then he's like, oh, wow, this new passport in the Open thing. And he won the Open in Honduras, doesn't live there anymore. And then traveled to the CrossFit Games to represent Honduras. He was flying the flag because he had the passport. So either way, you're going to have one or the other, right? It's going to be one or the other. And so to me, it's like a pretty equal trade-off. And then if the other major factor is most of these athletes are in their 20s, right? They're traveling for work. Maybe they have a young family. Maybe they don't have family. A lot of them are going to university. And so if they're traveling to go somewhere for university or to get their first job, and they're not going to have a ton of money, right? There's not a ton of money in this sport. And so to force them into a position where they probably just can't compete I don't think it's a good thing if you're trying to grow the sport and allow people to just take part in something that they're willing to spend their money on to do. And in my case, and even Pat Vellner's case, when our first regional, I moved to Australia to go to university. I found CrossFit there, fell in love with it, joined a gym, was loyal to that gym. Like that's what I was representing. I wasn't representing Canada. I was representing that gym. Canada, like I'm proud that I'm Canadian. I'm lucky that I'm Canadian, but like they don't support, I've been doing this for 10 years. There's nothing that the Canadian government's done that's supported me as an athlete, right? They just take my taxes. So I'm happy to like wear the flag and stuff, but it's I'm not going to the CrossFit Games as like a national pride. I'm representing Canada. Like I'm representing the people that have supported me. And so when I was in Australia, if this rule existed, like I might not be doing CrossFit right now because my first year I would have been training. Oh, I'll go to regionals. Like, oh, sorry, you can't. I'm like, well, I go to school here. Like, I can't afford to fly back to Vancouver. And it would have been the same for Pat. He was like a West person, like that's home, but he went out East for school. And so if they had like a stricter rule on East versus West, would have been the same thing. He's like, I can't fly back. I can drive to the East semi, but I can't fly home and compete in like Vancouver. So he just wouldn't have done it. So, who knows how many athletes you're missing out in that scenario. And to me, that outweighs the worry of, oh, will someone like intentionally move somewhere, which you can't prove if they're moving for work or if they're moving to just compete. So yeah.
So if that were to change to be the rule where you could move wherever, maybe even to easier regionals, then do we have this problem though that this group of athletes who have the financial means to move to an easier region have a competitive advantage over people who can't afford it?
Potentially, I think that happens in other sports. And if you have an accurate, I mean, there's sort of two scenarios. Like one, let's just assume that the current season continues to function the way that it does, which is open regionals games, which is how it's been since 2011. I mean, subtly different with quarters and semis now, but it's basically the same. The one thing you could do is have a better world ranking that's more accurate. And then you can allocate spots from the semis to the CrossFit Games. Oh, my heater just turned on. Can you still hear me? Is there like a white noise? Is it all right?
Nope, you're good.
You're
okay,
all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure I can turn it off. It's not that cold here.
It looks like the sun's out at least.
It's definitely a possibility. It didn't happen that much people definitely bounced around within North America. Maybe people tried to escape Central East beasts. But there wasn't like a massive influx of people leaving, Europe to go to live in Africa. I mean, yeah, there were some that got jobs in Dubai, but they would have went there anyway. So, I mean, I don't see it as a big problem. And if it improves the caliber of the athletes at the CrossFit Games, maybe that's a good thing. And then I think maybe the better question is, okay, let's say some athletes move from, let's say, Europe to Africa. They kind of live there and, it's sort of to make semis. It's sort of to try to qualify for the games. The worry there is, does that harm the African CrossFit scene? Maybe, but I think a better question is, what can you do to really functionally and tangibly improve the quality of the CrossFit competition scene and the sport in a developing area like Africa, like whether it's South Africa, Egypt, maybe the other places that are kind of thriving little hotspots of CrossFit. And I don't think the answer is, give them one more game spot, right? Or let's make sure they, instead of 30 spots at semis, it's 35. To me, that's not a real answer. It starts at the grassroots. It's like, how can we make the coaches better? How can we create more competition opportunities in their area against people of the same caliber? How can we get younger athletes involved in the sport so they can develop? Those are the real, and that's work, right? It's easy to just say, here's another game spot. Every national champion just makes the CrossFit Games. It's just this very easy, here you go, come to the CrossFit Games and get cut after one workout. Wasn't that great? I don't think that, that doesn't really help grow the sport in local, real areas with real people. Yeah, they might all be fighting and clawing over one game spot, and then yeah, sure, that turns into 2 or 3. And then a lot of the times they go to the CrossFit Games and they're finishing in the bottom 10 or bottom 20, or even if they finish in the top 10, does them going back, does that change everyone else's lives? I don't think so. They're proud of them and maybe they can still aspire to that, but that aspiration's still going to be there because they're watching the CrossFit Games, whether or not there's one African on the floor or there's 15, right? They're still going to watch. And so you need more opportunities in an area to compete. You need more experienced coaches. So I think having, if they really wanted to improve it, it's like, hey, how can we get an experienced CrossFit Games athlete or coach to develop a mentorship role, whether it's in person or online with more of those gyms? How can we develop a series of competitions that allow people of similar calibers to compete against each other in those areas? So instead of maybe 20 people taking the sport seriously in a city, it becomes 200, it becomes 2,000. And then from that, you'll get the cream rising to the top, and the best will become even better than the best were when there was just 20. So that's how you improve a sport in an area, not by, pandering to them and saying, here's one more spot, or, we're going to protect the spot that you have. I just don't think that functionally works long-term.
And there's almost this, this maybe not unintended, but this benefit to where if someone does do that and go down and take that spot, if there's this sense of national pride or regional pride that is implied with this rule, I almost feel like that will fire those people up to be like, no, that's our spot. That's something that we want to keep here. And when you see that person training or you're around that person, you're like, hey, like not only am I getting exposure to someone that from a more powerful region that's coming down and training and maybe helping plant seeds in that direction, I'm also seeing firsthand in this gym, you know, day in and day out.
What it
And
takes.
that stirs it up. And I think we overlook that a little bit. And I also think that, you know, there's so much that goes into the development process of these regions that at very least, the default of the like bad scenario is someone is like ingrained in that community by physically being there. I think that's better than the alternative.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, you know, I can't, like, I went to Egypt for a competition and I didn't go there as like a charity thing, right? I went there because I wanted to do the competition and I wanted to travel to Egypt because I wanted to see the pyramids, right? So that's why I went. But in the process, I've like, you know, I keep in touch with Ruan, who finished third at semifinals.
Mm-hmm.
I keep in touch with Cavio. We now share the same coach. He's from Egypt. He's one of the best athletes in Egypt. And, you know, like, I think I've played maybe like a small role in their development. And not to mention, you know, I had a lot of people say when I was there competing in Egypt, like, it was great to see me, how seriously I took my warm-ups, and just watching me do the workouts, watching me compete, even watching me train in the weeks leading up. They're like, oh, like that's kind of what it takes. You know, he takes it really seriously and he, you know, puts a lot of preparation into it. And there's just like, you know, and I remember that watching when I was young, seeing a professional beach volleyball player for the first time, watching him play. And it blew my mind how fast he was moving. And, you know, and they said, they're like, we watch you at the games, but to see it in person is like a totally different thing. And that, I remember that as a young player watching, you know, professional volleyball athletes, you know, when I was 17, I'm like, this is blowing my mind, because I've seen them on YouTube, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
When you watch them in person, it's totally different. And so to me, you know, and like, I empathize with, like, yeah, I would, in a perfect world, I would 100% prefer if it's someone who has an African passport, who's lived there their whole life, who represents there, that is representing Africa at the games. Like, yes. But in the interest of like having more people participate in the sport, and if someone, you know, moves there for a job and they just move there because they want to compete and they take that spot, yeah, it's not ideal in some principled fashion, but I think given the alternative, I think it's better. And I think long-term it could improve the quality of, among other steps. That's not the only step, but there are other things as well combined with that would improve the sport in that area.
So then when it comes to finding a system that works better, both for the athletes and the growth of the sport, is there anything tangible that the PFAA can do to help make progress with CrossFit, or what does that conversation and those steps look like right now?
Yeah, and so something like this situation with Ellie, you know, I've given it a lot of thought, and there's other things we're working on as well, PFA. But how can I word this? These are the types of situations, you know, historically, why, you know, the PFA was started, right? To try to you know, converse with competitions like CrossFit to, you know, hopefully have better rules that take into consideration the athletes and their needs, and then ensure the rules are being, you know, followed effectively. So like, these are the types of things that an athlete association exists for. And so it's frustrating that we are not in a place where we can like tangibly make a difference in this specific situation, right? So on the one hand, someone would say, well, what good is the PFAA if they can't, you know, help Ellie, let's say? And then maybe they're right. But, you know, I remember 5 years ago, something like this would happen and someone would say, oh, this is why we need an athlete association. So like, at least we have one, but it's just not in a place yet where we can force change, right? And that takes leverage, right? It takes, you know, more athletes buying into what we've got going on. And then it's a two-way street, right? It takes some leverage to convince CrossFit, or, you know, we look at what Wodapalooza did, and, you know, they kind of welcomed us in because they understood the value of having athletes that are bought into the system and believe in it, and, you know, want to be part of the process to make competitions better. And so hopefully, you know, CrossFit can kind of continue to, you know, bring us in. And I will say this, you know, over the past few years, speaking with people from CrossFit, like, I used to have this mentality that sometimes they would do things, make decisions with, like, what's the word, like ill intent or maliciously. And sometimes I would get to kind of peek behind the curtain and they'd give me an example or, you know, explain their rationale for making certain decisions. And you'd understand, oh, like I just assumed this. And then when I've given your point of view and, the facts that you have, I understand now why you made that decision. And whether or not maybe I like completely agree with it, I still think it was like a well-founded, good decision based on good principles, and not as, mischievous as some people might claim that it is. But that happens with communication, right? And, like another example, like in 2021 in May, Victor from Sweden, his team was disqualified and they were frustrated because they felt they gave all the information required to have a team. And CrossFit said, no, it's not good enough. And they're like, well, what else do you need? And it's like, well, it's just not good enough. They're like, we've given you everything you've asked for from the rule book. Yeah, but you can fake that. And it's like, well, what are we doing then? Right. And so like, there's situations like that it's like, well, if the person followed your rules and they're saying they're telling the truth and you're saying they're not, and I wasn't privy to look at all the documents, and they're not going to send them to me, but the people from that gym were still left feeling like, what did we do wrong? Like, I don't really understand. And so I'm sure there's some information that I'm not aware of. Right. Mm-hmm. And they came to that conclusion. They certainly didn't come to it lightly, but we're still left wondering like, okay, it's frustrating that someone's season ended and they're not really sure why.
Yeah, that was a tough one. And I felt like I got to see some of those documents, and it felt like in that scenario, they were just shy of like the threshold of what you needed specifically. Right. But that's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah.
But I mean, even touching on that, there is a history of some of these eligibility requirements. And I know you did your prep. So I want to hear I want to get the professor's history lesson and why and how it relates to the current scenario and where you feel, because there are some things you mentioned earlier about how it was applied to Ellie versus others that I want to pick your brain on after too.
Yeah. So basically, the Open started in 2011, and so from 2011 to 2018, as an individual athlete competing in the sport, which region, the regional that you went to, was solely based on, from what I could dig up and from my own personal memory, it's just which gym did you do the Open at the first week of the Open, which affiliate were you at, or if you weren't at an affiliate, where did you do the workout, like geographically, and that's your region. And then during that window of time, if you were on a team of 6, team of 4, it was the same kind of thing. It's like, where is your affiliate? But the requirements were a little more stringent. So I think in 2011 and 2012, they weren't as firm. And then they realized people, like, let's say there's like a large city and there's 10 gyms. They're kind of making these super teams within the city, saying like, yeah, we all go to CrossFit downtown Sydney or something. And were they really training there? Like, and so in 2013, they started to tighten up the rules, and there were basically, it was like this 50%. It's like, you have to prove during a certain number of weeks over the year that 50% of your training, or 4 or 3 days a week of your training, are done at that gym. You need photo and video evidence. And there were always instances of gyms, getting penalties that they didn't feel were fair, or were getting away with penalties that other teams felt were unfair. I remember an example of an athlete from America, and there were photos of that person, being on like a tour, whether it was, an affiliate thing, or they were putting on seminars or family, but they were away during that window for like 2 weeks, I think in Japan or Korea. And then they were still allowed to compete on the team. And it's like, well, by the letter of the rule, yeah, they're on vacation, they're on a work trip, but by the letter of the rule, they didn't do 50% of their training during those 2 weeks at the affiliate in America, but they still got to compete. And I remember, teams from Australia that I was kind of familiar with because I competed there, felt like they were, penalized and not able to compete because of, the ruling of CrossFit saying you didn't follow our rules. So then fast forward, it's 2019, the whole season kind of changes. All of a sudden, now super teams are cool. Like, it's totally fine to have a super team as long as you just show up to one of the semis with a team, sanctionals, and you're good to go. And then as an athlete, it was, where's your passport? So now all of a sudden you had athletes like Frankie Wood, like Alessandro Pacelli, who live in North America, but they use their passport from, a country where they have some lineage, and they get to compete under that flag during the Open and qualify for the games using that passport. And then we go back to 2021. So there's 3 years later, and we keep those passport rules, but we bring it back to like the sanction or the semifinal kind of regional era. So then you have these athletes that are sort of in this in between. Someone like Ellie, where, you know, she's living somewhere, but she has to go and compete back where she has a passport. And then the team went back to the old rules. You have to prove you're at this affiliate a certain number of times per week, whatever. And I think CrossFit, I mean, I can't say for certain, but I think they realized with those affiliate rules, this is just a lot of work. You know, it's a lot of work for us to, like, you know, read through all this stuff, look through all these photos, and you had a situation like Victor where I'm sure it was hours of work for them to determine, you know, are we going to allow these people to compete or not? They're like, you know what, let's just let people do super teams, make them go to the affiliate for the open, make them go to the affiliate for the quarters. That's enough. I was talking to Pat about it, and he's like, man, I wouldn't, you know, if someone wanted me to be on a team and, you know, where it's an 8-hour drive, like, he's like, no, you know, like,
I mean, look at Tim Paulson last year. Like,
yeah, that was brutal.
Following him on Instagram, and he would be getting flight delays and getting home at 2, 3 a.m. Like, it is a huge commitment just to do that and be a parent and a husband and all of these things.
So it's like, if someone wants to do that, there's going to be so few people that try to, like, game it to be on a team. It's like, I say, let them do it. And I kind of think the same thing for the individuals. So now they're in this spot where, you know, for Ellie, it's like 3 years is a long time. In the life of an athlete, you maybe have 10 years in this sport, like, at the most, probably for most people, at competing at a high level, give or take. And so just to kind of, like, maybe take 3 years away from someone because they're going to university or they found a job in another country. And it's like, hey, like, you know, unless you've got a ton of money to go back and compete, like, you just don't get to play the game anymore. Yeah. And so flashing back to last year, so those, like, you know, that's kind of the history of those rules. So that the team sort of went to a lot of detail, absolutely no detail, a lot of detail, and now back to no detail, or, you know, however you want to, detail is not the right word. But, and now individuals, it was like, hey, where are you going to the affiliate? And then it's passport, but at least you had opportunities to compete in person at these sanctionals that, you know, because they were all spread out all over the world. You could at least go to a high level competition to be in your area. And they didn't care about your passport at the sanctionals. It was just for the open. But now the last 3 years, you have this passport thing. And yeah, it's just super frustrating. You know, it's a kind of a small sport. And so for a lot of athletes, pretty much every athlete, it's just a huge financial burden to ask them to, like, fly back like it is for Ellie. So, and then what I talked about before, you know, I just don't think the sport that we exist in really is like a national representation sport, right? You know, you look at other things like whether it's FIFA or the Olympics, it's like there's national teams, there's national points, there's qualification, there's like a national championship. And that's what the IF3 is doing, right? And I like the IF3 and they're doing great work, but CrossFit's not interested in doing any of that, right? They're not interested in being part of that world. They're running a company. And yeah, it's a sport, but it's not. It isn't. It's closer to, like, American Idol than it is an Olympic sport, or, you know. So it's just like, where are you? Show up, compete, and let's do this. And you represent your affiliate. You know, and especially for a lot of athletes, you look at Tia, Katrin, Roman, Ellie, Turner, Annika Greer, like, they moved to America because that's where the sport is mostly played, right? Like, that's where a lot of the best coaches and most experienced coaches are. That's where the brands are based. That's where a lot of the big competitions are, both in season and off season. They move there for better opportunities. And so it's kind of frustrating that, like, as an athlete, if you're trying to take this seriously, you know, coming to America is kind of where a lot of the opportunities are. You know, and not to mention train alongside, like, really good athletes, if that's something that, you know, is a priority for you with, like, good equipment and all that. And, like, you come to America to play in the PGA Tour, right? Maybe you move to England to play in the Premier League. And in CrossFit, you know, we're a lot closer to those sports than we are to the Olympics or FIFA. You come to America because that's kind of where the opportunities are in this sport. And so to, like, prohibit an athlete from doing that is frustrating. And, you know, we have the affiliate cup. It's not a national team cup either. So in the team portion of our sport, it's not like, yeah, like, that affiliate is based in a country, but not necessarily all those athletes are even from that country. So, yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention last year was, you know, so last year we had to, you know, claim, okay, what area are you in? And do you have that passport? And so, like, they never asked for my passport, right? So I did the open, I did the quarters, I did the semis, I did the games. And when you go to semis, you need a valid issue of government photo ID, which can be a driver's license. You can get a driver's license or a, you know, government issued 18 plus card or 21 plus card without having a passport from that area. So Ellie was kind of penalized because we know who she is, right? She's like famous. She's very good at the sport. And so we know she's Australian. And so, we can kind of hone in on her and make sure she's following the rules. But I'm sure there's thousands, if not hundreds of people that compete in the open that selected the wrong area because, let's say they're studying in California and, but their passport is from Japan and they're studying in California and they go to a gym there and they sign up for the open. So they're like, oh, California. They click California because whatever. And then they do the quarters. Oh, that was fun. I'm going to do the quarters. And again, their scores are affecting that leaderboard. Their rank, their workouts are affecting other people, whether they make it to the next stage or not. They're still playing in the sport. If you do the open, you're a CrossFit athlete, according to CrossFit Inc., right? And then what if that person made semis last year? They go, oh, damn, I made semis. Maybe at some point they realized, oh, crap, I should actually be in the Asian, the open and the quarters, but well, it's just down the road. I'm going to go anyway and see what happens. And then they go and they ask for a driver's license. They're like, sweet. They didn't know. Right. So there's, CrossFit has these rules, but they're certainly not, they don't have the ability and they didn't create the systems to enforce them consistently. And I certainly don't expect them to ask everyone to send a scanned copy of their passport if they qualify for quarters. Asking a couple thousand people to email them their passport is a little insane. So, if you can't consistently enforce those things in the quarters, which is how you get to semis, then if you get to semis and at that point, should have they asked for passports last year? Sure. If someone didn't bring them, are you going to kick them out? I guess if they, repetitively said, you got to bring it, you got to bring it, you got to bring it, and reminded us of that, then yeah. But you're creating this barrier to compete that just to me doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, like I said, last year they didn't enforce it, right? So they enforced it on Ellie. But were there other athletes that got away with it? Maybe. I don't really know. So yeah, that's kind of my little history lesson there, and kind of where we are now. So it'd be on the one hand, I want them to change the rule. On the other hand, it'd be really unfortunate if next year they change it and Ellie's like sick. So that the rule, took you this long to realize that the rule wasn't so great, and now that I'm actually at the 3-year limit.
Yeah.
But I still do want them to change it, or maybe like you said, Tommy, maybe it's a 1-year thing. I just don't get why it needs to be 1, and 3 is a lot, right? Especially in the in the lifespan of a 20-something-year-old athlete. That's like a full university degree almost, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, great, I'm not going to be able to compete during that time. It seems in the most prestigious events of the year, the semis and the games, is pretty frustrating. And the other thing, this is another, you heard it here first, like the way that they've described self-identification for East versus West in North America isn't holding those athletes who maybe bounce back and forth to the same standard. They don't have to show 3 years of residency. They don't, or passport change or whatever. So it's kind of frustrating that you can bounce to East and West as easily as you want. And this year, they just in the rule book, it just says residency. It doesn't give a timeline. It doesn't give a specific date. It just says, well, where do you reside? So it's like, does that mean it's for the last year or the last 3 years, the first week of the open, where you do the open? It's very vague. And that's an unfortunate thing. And, we warned them of that in December and they decided not to change it. But because athletes might try to bounce back and forth, and it's likely the famous ones that will be penalized if you're like, oh, we all know you don't live there because we've been following your Instagram, or it could be the lower level athletes that maybe sneak from East to West or from West to East, and maybe do it strategically, which, I'm happy for them to do. But, what it does is when you have a vague rule, you're going to get people living in that gray area. And then it takes a lot of time and work for CrossFit to try to sort those people out using a vague set of, undefined criteria. And that's work and time that they could be spent in other areas that I think would be more advantageous for the growth of the sport. And so when you create these vague, I think they sometimes create rules that maybe are intentionally vague, so then they can, use their discretion. And like I said before, I don't think they typically use their discretion in a malicious way, but you open yourself up to that criticism from the public when you don't have specific rules and you're kind of applying them in a way that, you're not willing to disclose. And so, yeah, I think we're going to see this year some athletes that move from East to West, West to East, and some penalties will be applied and some won't. And it'll be exciting. It'll be something to talk about for a sport that doesn't have a lot of competitions throughout the year. We have no shortage of things to talk about. And sometimes I think it's, I don't know if that's a feature or a bug, of the sport, but it's certainly something that seems to
That's
rear its head every 2 weeks or so.
That's a good way of putting it. I don't know if it's a feature or a bug, because I mean, you mentioned the application of it, and sometimes it's intentionally vague. And I think really that's what has gotten people most up in arms with regards to Ellie. One, because the rules kind of popped up out of nowhere. The 3-year rule didn't exist before 2023. So it wasn't in the year. It wasn't, if it was a rule, it wasn't codified in the rule book until 2023. So it was a judgment call in that vague area that you mentioned. When they implemented, there wasn't any sort of ramp up time where like, hey, we're going to implement this rule
1, 2, 3 or something.
Yeah, we'll do 1, 2, 3 and ramp it up. And then, then you go immediately after the first ruling last year with Ellie having to go back to Australia. A lot of people got up in arms, and this is not to drag her name through the mud, but it is what it is. But Katrin got the exemption despite competing 2 years in Europe and moving to a new section of the United States. And we weren't given a clear rule. It seems to be that there was some credit given in the past, but it was like you were given credit for something that happened before you already established residency and competed in Europe. So there was like a lot of vague there. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that you run into, where athletes, I think people would have been fine if that rule was applied as written across the board. But when you can point to someone else and be like, as it's written, we were treated differently, that's where I think you get into trouble.
Yeah, exactly right. And we don't know all the details of Katrin's case. Like I don't hold anything against her.
No, for sure.
If I was, it's like she might have just 2 home addresses, right? Like 2 very physical home addresses, and I don't know. I literally don't know. But yeah, like I think to circle back right to the beginning, athlete associations in other sports, like in the NFL, like they'll have meetings about, we want to change a rule, right? And so we want to have a specific rule change in regards to protecting the quarterback or something like that, right? We want to make sure our quarterbacks stay safe. And so the athlete association will have an opinion on that based on what the athletes want. And then, maybe the organizations have a different opinion, the owners and the league, that are in their interest, whether it's, we want it to be a more exciting game or whatever those things are. And then there's like a back and forth and there's an understanding of that. And so we want to make sure that the rules are good. And like I said, to the athletes we've spoken to the coaches, it's in the best interest of the athletes overall to just be based on where are you and just compete. And again, like the one place it would potentially negatively impact are some of those developing areas, right? South America, Africa, Asia. If, an athlete of maybe a more experienced caliber from Europe or North America moved there. But I think if you look at the totality of how it would positively or negatively affect a group of athletes and from a fairness perspective and an ease of applying the rules, I think it makes more sense to go back to what we had in 2011 to 2018, something closer to that. And then, the other thing is, do we like the rules? And then are they being enforced consistently? And, it's hard to say when we don't have every single detail, right? Yeah.
Is this something that, and I know when we've reached out to CrossFit, they said that they weren't going to, give more details or insight to the situation until the entire, exemption process was over, which I think isn't until February 28th. I want to say like right before the Open.
Yep.
Have you or other people from the PFAA spoken with CrossFit and, had some kind of conversation about advancing or changing the rule?
Not as much as we'd like. We reached out to them. We talked about a few other rules. There was that one, we requested some more information even regarding the details for quarterfinals, right? Like, how many workouts per window, kind of what those time windows will look like, because it's changed a bit this year. And we felt like that information would help athletes prepare effectively and gyms prepare logistically, and also allow CrossFit to make more money, because the more details you have on that, you're more likely to get kind of some more community members involved. And their answer to that was like, it's going to be what it's going to be. We tried to provide them with some quality advice on how it could make them some more money and how it would be also positively impact athletes. We think it'd be a win-win, but maybe they're just not writing the workouts yet and they don't want to commit to anything until their workouts are done. But yeah, we haven't had as much meaningful conversation on the application of the rule and, perhaps diving into what that would look like to change the rules we'd like to have.
Yeah, and hopefully some change can happen, because I mean, if we follow in the footsteps of other sports, once the rule does change, usually the athlete who was the catalyst for that, unfortunately, your name gets tied to it, because even if you don't get the benefit of it, like, the Calvin Johnson rule in the NFL around what constitutes a catch has been one of the most hotly contested rules in modern memory, at least. And heck, even in this sport, we have the Rich Froning rule, which is the no dumping bars behind you. And that was something that was implemented after 2014, which would have negated his famous final rep in double grace. But sometimes those athletes don't get the benefit, even though they're tied to it. But I mean, if there's anything off the top of your head, Brent, that you feel like needs to be addressed around these rules, or what's coming down the pipe?
Sorry, could you ask that again?
I was saying, is there anything else that we're leaving out as far as like these rules or details behind the scenes that the average person who maybe doesn't read the rule book is unaware of? If not, I mean, I just want to make sure we're covering all our bases.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty well covered. Hopefully everything I've said is factually correct. Comment and like if I missed something. Prove me wrong. I think everything I said was pretty factually correct in regards to the history of how you qualify as an individual in the team, which I think is important for context. And I think it's also important to compare to other sports. Like what kind of sport are we? What kind of sport do we want to be? And like, for example, we didn't have the opening ceremonies, right? At the CrossFit Games the first time that it happened was 2019, and then we've had it ever since. So, I think having the nation's athletes with a passport maybe has kind of emboldened that. The opening ceremonies doesn't really do much for me. Maybe there's other people. Maybe the fan, like, I know at the Olympics, the opening ceremonies is a big deal, right? Athletes are stoked to do it. And the fans are, the stadium's packed to watch the opening ceremonies. But maybe that's, again, maybe they have a vision for where they want it to go. But for me, it's like if you're removing the masters and the teens, all of a sudden that opening ceremony is just like not a lot of people to fill it up. It's just 40 men, 40 women, and 30 or 40 teams. The opening ceremonies all of a sudden just shrunk a lot. So it becomes a much smaller event, which to me more, resembles like a PGA championship or something like that, where, hey, this is the world championship of this privately owned sport. So I just don't think the national pride element of this sport is it's going to be a driving factor of its growth in the future. It's really like creating opportunities to compete and, emboldening affiliates and kind of tying in maybe, what the affiliates are doing to how athletes can, be involved with their affiliate, but also involved in like competitions, both local and abroad. I think we pretty much covered it.
Yeah. And honestly,
beat it to a dead pulp.
Hey, it's better than the alternative, but in the case of certain countries, because I know this is the last comment I'll have. There are countries that are receiving national funding. Part of that has been built through the IF3 as well. But
I think it's all through the IF3.
Yeah, and some of this they recognize functional fitness as a sport that they can get
because of the IF3.
Yeah, so
for sure,
and
which is great.
I don't think changing the rule for CrossFit would prevent that in the first place anyway. So
no, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, and that's a great example of people. I admittedly don't know a ton about that, but I think in what's the country that's really crushing it?
Norway.
Norway. Yeah. And so they like the government of Canada funds the like hockey for youth hockey, and they fund all sorts of sports, right? You can get funding for your team and for your travel. Like Norway gets like it's a couple $100,000. And so if you're a Norway athlete that competes in IF3 events and you go to CrossFit Inc. events or you go to Wadapalooza, whatever, you're getting money for that travel. Some of your healthcare expenses are covered if you like have to get a surgery, equipment, coaches travel, like all this stuff is covered. And, that's props to what the IF3 has been, working really hard to create. So they're kind of the shining light of what's maybe possible when you can get some of that juicy government funding for sporting. It's a really good thing. Like, and then you're seeing it at Wadapalooza, where some of those Scandinavian countries, it's like, oh crap, they're coming. It's a new hotbed because they're able to focus more on training, right? They're able to kind of focus more on training, and the coaches get more experience. And there's a there's this intangible level of like faith, right? And it's this like hope and faith and belief, and it's like, oh, there's something there, and there's like something for me here long term.
Mm-hmm.
So there's there'd be a group of athletes there that are striving to be the next, whoever, like, the athletes in that area. And and I've seen the inverse in some ways happen, let's say in Canada, where especially during COVID, like kind of the local competition scene and like CrossFit style events, throwdowns went down, just because you couldn't have them. And so because of that, in a lot of gyms, there's like less people, training with the goal of competing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more people you have training with the goal to compete, and then you're going to have more people doing the thing and buying shoes and signing up for the open and all that stuff. So
all the good things.
Yeah.
Yep.
All the good things. Buying shoes. Speaking of which, tier.
I was gonna say, we already got the big logo right across the chest.
Yeah.
There's nothing I appreciate more than
yeah.
But I think like everything's tied together, right? And so you just want more people given the opportunity to compete against people of a similar skill level, right? And if that skill level becomes top of the world, then you should be in the best events. But
sure.
I think creating more opportunities in areas and in those developing areas, and figuring out like culturally and stuff, like how to make that happen, as opposed to just making sure that someone with a passport from that area gets a ticket to the games, I don't think is a very nuanced approach that's going to have like a lasting impact.
For sure. Well, we appreciate the discussion, Brent. Thank you as always for being willing to hop on and shine some light on that, because I know you're doing a ton of work, and the PFAA, even if you're maybe not where you want to be, you guys keep trudging forward, and hopefully that's just the stepping stone to eventually getting there. So thanks again as always. Hopefully training the rest of the day goes well with your Jello legs, but and you get to.
They're better now.
Okay,
they're better now. Yeah,
the standing helped.
We're good.
Oh, there we go.
yeah, standing still for 45 minutes.
Oh man.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Brent.
Thanks again to Brent. As always, appreciate his insight and research, and like you said, he's always one of our most well prepared guests, and I thought he made some great points overall.
Yeah, and it just was interesting to also go through what the ruling used to be, or what it used to look like, especially in the infancy of the open and kind of this system that we get to up until the games, but also comparing it to some other sports. And I am really curious. I would love to ask somebody from CrossFit if the goal is to have more of a system that looks like the Olympics, or if another system could be more favorable to, of course, we want to talk about the athletes and what is beneficial to them, but also what's beneficial to the sport, and how can we see the sport grow over the next 5, 10, 100 years from now.
Yeah, and I did mention, and I meant to mention it during our interview with Brent, but there are national champions. I think some people got them in the mail like 2 weeks ago. Some athletes were posting it. They got it just before the end of the year. So there is a national champion thing. I don't know how much it factors into the actual participatory aspect of the sport, or if that's something that's necessarily driving people towards the open of the sport more frequently. But it certainly is an interesting thought. And I think, some of the comparisons were pretty apt. And I don't know, I still kind of feel, I know on Death by earlier this week, if you haven't already, go check it out. We talked about this. I was leaning more towards kind of a hybrid model, and some aspect of being able to still do, opening ceremonies or some national representation to just get people supportive of that. Maybe there's an additional competition series that you could do that could be more nation focused, that would be kind of scratch that itch, and then I'll open up the doors to be a little bit more open, like Brent goes. But I think I'm starting to shift a little bit. I think I'm starting to shift more towards like ease of use scenario. After hearing Brent.
Well, even when I think of the opening ceremony, I think I went in 2019, and I mean, I'm there on site. I easily could go to the opening ceremonies, but I truly think that was the only year that I went and watched. I I think that if we're going to have it, there should be more hype around it. There should be some kind of spectacle and reason that pulls people and draws them in as, hey, this is the official start of the CrossFit Games.
Yeah. And I I think that if they can do, or if in that hybrid model, if they're able to do something that's more, I've always said we should do a Nations Cup where you take all the national champions from the early parts of the season and have a secondary parallel type event, individual or team wise to the games. That is kind of like that exposure piece, but not necessarily the main focus. So you still have people coming to the games and getting involved, and more athletes competing, representing their countries. And maybe that's separate from the games too, but I think there is a way to play into that. But as it stands, like if we're all doing this just for the opening ceremonies, it seems kind of a bit of a miss as far as like really honing on what's most important in like Brent said, creating organic growth and grassroots type movements in some of these developing countries. But yeah, and I'm sure, like you said, we're going to get more insight to it from CrossFit side as they finish up that process. And once they finish all the exemptions, hopefully they provide us with the full scope of information, which they've been communicative about it with us along the way.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to get their take more too once we have final word. So yeah, but as we always mention, we don't have community support for today, but if there is, if you do have something, be sure to share it. Hit us up on social media. Let us know what's going on. We always want to support the things that are going on in the space, and hopefully lend a helping hand. And send that to both our personal and TEF Instagram accounts as well. Anything else before we sign off? What are you up to this weekend?
I'm actually going to Florida for a couple days to visit my brother with my family.
Nice. Hopefully better
so we're
weather.
Gonna ring in. Yeah, it's like a high of 73, so not like super warm, but I mean, right now at my house, actually, it's 54 today, so it's a relatively nice day in Syracuse.
It's funny because it's 55 here, and I'm like, it's a cold day today.
I was like, oh, I don't even need a jacket to go outside, but yeah. So gonna celebrate the Super Bowl at my brother and sister-in-law's house, and we all have our Taylor Swift gear, so we are ready.
Oh, okay. So yep. All right.
What are you and Tiff up to?
We will be going watching Super Bowl with some friends. It's tough because I want my wife to be happy, but she's a Niners fan, so I kind of don't in this scenario.
So you can't be.
So because I don't want the Niners to win. But yeah, it should be fun either way. I think there was like so many, and this is totally an aside, but in 2019, the lead-in Super Bowl to the election was Kansas City Chiefs Niners. In 2023, 2024, the lead-in Super Bowl to the election is Chiefs Niners. Isn't that funny how history repeats itself?
Wow, that is really weird.
I heard this stat from Chris Berman. He said it happened one other time with the Browns and the Rams, I believe in the 50s, where the same two presidential candidates squared off, and the same two teams squared off in the Super Bowl both those years. So kind of crazy.
That's a good stat.
Yeah, this is fun. This is
one
of those weird. It's like, okay, what are you going to do with that stat? I don't know. I just wasted an hour thinking about that. So that's what goes on inside my head. Well, I know you got to run, Lauren. So have a great time in Florida. Are you going to play some pickleball?
I think I'm going to spend more time getting buried by my nephew in the sand, but
a noble pursuit. Well, yep.
Well, at least for our Patreons, I will be live on Q&A close to the beach. So now maybe we'll get some like pickleball in the background or something.
It's not quite me making popcorn balls, but it'll do.
I know. I can't keep up with you.
Oh man. Well, safe travels. We'll catch up with you tomorrow. Thanks everyone for listening and tuning in. And thanks again for Brent Fikowski for taking the time out of his day in between training sessions to come shine some light on that. So for everyone at home, and this, I'll end it the same way I did last time in honor of Sean, who will be back next week. Take care of each other, be better, and we'll talk to you guys soon.